Hey guys, I just wanted to hop on today to talk about photography. So specifically talking about adding more movement into action shots. My kids have really got into mountain biking recently after watching a Danny McCaskill video. And so we went to the local bike park. And as I was packing my bag that day, my main camera's battery was flat. The Osmo's battery was flat. And the one thing that was left on my desk was my mum's old Nikon D70 the boys had been using to practice their photography. So I thought, oh, that might be a bit of fun to take that out. You know, this is an old body. I think it's like 2003 maybe. My mum got it second hand for about £70. Yeah, 79.99 it says on the bottom. So £80 a number of years ago, and you can now get these for £30 today. So really good value camera. I like old cameras. I like nostalgic stuff. So for anyone who's starting out in photography and is sort of blindsided by the price of gear these days, you don't need super fancy gear to achieve great results. And particularly sometimes getting an older piece of gear will help you hone your skills much better for when you jump onto that fancy piece of gear. So we're going to the bike park. This was a camera that was on my desk. I grabbed it and I set myself a rule for the day. What I wanted to achieve was action shots of the boys with a lot more movement in them to convey the feeling of the movement that was happening in the shots. Because one of the things you'll see on sports photography, a lot of shots are capturing like a static moment and they're freezing that moment. And that can be hugely powerful when you think of like a football game and it freezes that shot and the ball's in the right hand corner and it's about to hit the goal. And like, you see that on the newspaper and it's like, wow, incredible. And so static shots, I think, work really well when they capture like the scale of something, whether that's a snowboarder on a huge mountain or like the photos of the waves at Nazare. The scale of the thing conveys enough of a story. But sometimes that staticness, particularly you maybe don't have that scale or maybe when there's not space for the composition. This is like my young lads riding not particularly gnarly trails. How do I give this photo interest? So that was like the question, how do I make this photo more interesting than just a shot of a kid on a bike? How do I give it that sense of movement? So I went with this intention purely to capture some shots and add some movement to them. And one of the best ways I think to do this is to add some slow shutter to your photos. Now, this isn't everyone's cup of tea. There's a lot of debate on sort of blurry photos. It might have become more trendy on the internet, but it's something that I think has always been around, and I personally like it and think it's really effective for creating emotive and ethereal images. I think it's really good for creating movement and a sense of movement in your images. And so basically, you drop your shutter speed, and so when you take a photo, the shutter is open longer. And so anything that moves within that will be captured and blurred. You will have probably had this on your iPhone when you've taken a photo in the dark and you've got a shaky hand and you can see all the lights wiggling. That's because the shutter has been open longer and the light that it's recording in, there's camera shake, so it moves. A low shutter speed means that the shutter is open for longer, letting more light hit the sensor. And so if we do this for too long, if that shutter's open too long, the photo will become overexposed because too much light will get in. There's a couple of ways of getting around this. One is to have what's called an ND filter, which is like sunglasses for your camera. You put your camera sunglasses, screw it into the front of your lens, and you can control how much light is passing through. That allows you to have a lower f-stop when you shoot, so you can still get that nice sharp focus point, but nice blurred out backgrounds with your bokeh. I don't know how you say it, much debate on the internet again, but the nice blurriness in the background. If you're into that as well, not everyone's into that. But I didn't have an ND filter. So the workaround for me was get the ISO, which is basically, back in the day, ISO used to be film sensitivity to light. And so it's the sensor's sensitivity to light. We want the sensitivity as low as possible, which on this camera is 200 ISO. And then we want to get our f-stop higher, because that closes the aperture of the camera lens, letting less light through, so that we can have a lower shutter speed, so the shutter can be open for longer. So that's then allowing light in, but our photo isn't going to become overexposed because it's letting light in effectively slower or less light in. Get those settings set up. They're not going to be dialed in straight away. It's going to be experimental. And so when my subject's moving, what I'm trying to do is track the subject. And so when I open the shutter and tracking the subject, I'll get a little bit of that camera drag, but the subject should be in focus because I'm following it. And so if my camera is moving roughly the same speed of the subject, that subject is kind of stationary in terms of the camera and all the background is moving. So if you imagine it's moving at the same time like that, rather than my camera being stationary and that moving past and basically the background being in focus and the subject being blurry. I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to track my subject so the subject stays in focus and the background is all blurred out. And I think it's a super effective way of adding movement to your images. So yeah, here are a few of the images. Now, I know these aren't the most incredible, groundbreaking images. They're not my best photos by a country mile. But what I love about them is the fact that they were taken on a camera that is now £30, that they do evoke some sense of movement, some sense of action, some sense of speed to what would normally be a very boring, static, just nice to have family photo. It's given them an edginess. And for someone who's trying to get into photography, who is on a budget or doesn't want to invest in, and they shouldn't be investing in high-end gear when you're starting out, but to start to practice the basics, to pick up a, 30 pound body. I think this lens was £80 at the time. So, you're talking about another £30. So maybe a £60 bundle. And you can be away taking interesting shots, experimenting with low shutter speeds, getting to know the basics of photography. It's a real good inroad. And for anyone who's a seasoned pro to reconnect with the joy of photography, I think it's really fun to get yourself an old camera and mess around with it and see if you can achieve some of the things that you do on your fancy gear on a camera that only has a burst shot of 4 frames per second or something, or is limited on its ISO when you're trying to do late night shots. Whatever it is, get yourself some old gear to play around with to basically create inspiration for new projects, new ideas, new ways of thinking. So yeah, get out there, get shooting, stay creative.